He opened the ledger after midnight, not to read it, to remove a page. The book was kept behind the sacristy wall, wrapped in linen darkened by oil and dust. It did not belong to the parish inventory. It never had. The priest knew that because the seal on the spine was older than the church itself, pressed into leather before the altar stones were laid. He had waited until the bells cooled, until even the rat stopped moving beneath the floor. He lifted the cover. The pages were not numbered. That was the first warning. He slid 2 fingers under the corner of a sheet and pulled. The paper resisted, not with glue or stitching, but with weight, as if it remembered something. When it finally gave way, the sound was wrong. Too dry, like bone. He folded the page, placed it inside his cassock, and closed the book. When he returned the next morning, the page he had taken was already gone from his pocket, and the ledger was missing another. No official record explains how the book arrived in the parish. No entry in the diocesan archives mentions its delivery. What they never wrote down was that the ledger predated the priest. It predated the bishop. It predated the town's name. Only one thing about it was consistent. Every time someone tried to copy it, something vanished. At first, the priest told himself it was age. Paper decays. Ink fades. But the absences were too clean. Entire entries gone, not blurred, not torn. Just not there. Lines that should have continued stopped mid-sentence, as if the hand that wrote them had been interrupted and never resumed. Those who knew never spoke again, not publicly. The priest did not find the ledger by accident. He was sent toward it quietly, through hints and half-questions. A visiting canon had asked about the old accounting book. A confessor from another province had paused too long at the sacristy wall, fingers resting where the stones sounded hollow. No one gave instructions. They never did. Minimal context was all he had. The parish had once stood at the edge of a plantation corridor. Sugar and coffee passed through here. So did bodies. Baptisms were recorded. Burials were recorded. Donations meticulously listed. But there were gaps in the years that mattered most. Entire decades where the town appeared almost empty on paper, and yet the ledger was full. It did not record money. It recorded custody. Names were written in a careful hand. Not family names, not Christian names. Single words. Some repeated, some crossed out. Beside them, dates. Beside the dates, symbols that never appeared in any catechism. The priest understood enough Latin to know this was not theology. It was inventory. He told no one at first. That was instinct, not fear. Something older. The ledger was not meant to be discussed. It was meant to be handled briefly, quietly, and returned. The second time he tried to remove a page, he watched it fade. It happened slowly. The ink paled while he held it. Letters thinned, as if breathing out. By the time he reached the door, the page was blank. When he looked back at the ledger, the same entry was already gone. What they never wrote down was that the book corrected itself. This was not a curse. It was a function. Stay with this. Because 6 years earlier, another priest had tried the same thing in a neighboring district. His correspondence still exists. The letters are ordinary. Requests for wine. Complaints about damp stone. Then one sentence, out of place. The ledger no longer agrees with me. After that, nothing. The church never announced his transfer. His name simply stopped appearing. The current priest began to notice patterns. Entries disappeared only after being acknowledged. Pages vanished after being understood. Ignorance preserved them. Knowledge erased them. As if the ledger was not hiding the truth. As if it was waiting to see who could hold it. The book was older than the records around it. The binding style suggested late 18th century, but the paper was inconsistent. Some sheets were newer, others impossibly old. One page crumbled when touched. Another bent like fresh parchment. The anomaly was not that pages disappeared. It was that new absences kept forming where old ones should have been. Entire transactions gone, leaving only consequences. Names erased, leaving only totals. Tallies without sources. No official record explains how so many people moved to the parish without ever appearing in the baptismal rolls. The ledger did, but only until it didn't. Late one night, the priest tried something different. He did not remove a page. He traced a line with his finger, just enough pressure to follow the ink. The next morning, that line was gone, and so was the stone beneath the sacristy wall. Not collapsed, removed, a clean rectangle, as if it had never been there. Behind it, nothing, just a darker absence where space should have been. Those who knew never spoke again because there was nothing left to point to. The ledger did not defend itself. It withdrew, and the more the priest learned, the less there was to find. The absence behind the wall did not alarm the priest immediately. That came later. At first, he told himself the stone had been removed long ago, a forgotten niche, an abandoned reliquary space. Churches accumulate emptiness the way forests accumulate shade. But when he reached inside, his fingers brushed something cold and smooth, then nothing at all. The cavity had depth but no back. Sound died inside it. He sealed the wall again before dawn, not with mortar, with silence. That morning, the ledger felt heavier. He noticed at the moment he lifted it from its shelf, not heavier in weight, but in insistence, as if the book resisted being carried away from where it rested. He placed it on the table and opened it carefully, afraid now to look directly at the entries he remembered. They were still there, but altered. Names he had memorized were replaced with marks, not erasures, substitutions. The careful hand remained, the ink equally dark, but the words had changed into symbols he did not recognize, repeating shapes, vertical strokes intersected by small hooks. They looked less like letters and more like tallies. No official record explains what those symbols meant, but the priest began to understand their rhythm. Each mark corresponded to movement, arrival, departure, transfer, not sales, custody. The parish, it seemed, had functioned as a holding point, not officially, not legally. The ledger never said why people were here, only that they passed through, briefly, quietly, almost invisibly. The absence of violence in the book was unsettling. There were no punishments recorded, no deaths, no resistance, just motion, as if the most important thing about these lives was that they did not stop moving. That night, the priest tried to cross-reference the dates with burial records. There were none. He tried baptismal registries. Incomplete. Marriage rolls. Empty. What they never wrote down was that the ledger replaced every other record. It was not supplemental. It was central. Everything else existed to distract from it. He found a pattern then. Entries disappeared not when he read them, but when he understood their implication. The moment a connection formed in his mind, between a name and a destination, between a symbol and a quantity, the ledger responded by removing that line. It was not random. It was selective. The priest began to delay comprehension. He forced himself to skim without absorbing, to look without interpreting. He learned to read around meaning, the way one avoids staring directly at something too bright. This worked, for a time, until the margins began to shrink. The blank space around the text narrowed by millimeters each day. The ledger was compressing itself, as if conserving what remained. And then something new appeared, a different hand, not contemporary, older. The ink was brown, almost translucent. The handwriting slanted sharply, impatient. Unlike the careful script of the main entries, these additions were brief, often only a word or two, sometimes just a date circled twice. The priest did not recognize the language, but one phrase repeated often enough that he memorized its shape, a phrase that only appeared beside entries that vanished shortly afterward. He copied the shape of it onto scrap paper, without understanding. The next morning, the scrap paper was blank, and the phrase was gone from the ledger. The retention of this knowledge required isolation. The priest began avoiding conversation. He shortened sermons. Confessions became brief. Parishioners noticed a change, but attributed it to age, to burden, to the ordinary weight of vocation. Only one man asked directly, an accountant. He was not from the town. He had been sent by an estate administrator to reconcile church donations with plantation accounts. He requested access to old financial records. The priest showed him everything except the ledger. The man noticed anyway. Some absence always announces itself. He asked about the hollow sound behind the sacristy wall. He asked about discrepancies in the years. He asked why the church had received offerings during months when, according to state ledgers, there were no workers present in the region at all. The priest said nothing. The next morning, the accountant did not return to his lodging. No official record explains his departure. His employer never inquired. His name never appeared again in correspondence. That same day, the ledger lost an entire section, dozens of pages, not torn out, gone. The binding tightened, drawing the remaining pages together. The spine cracked softly, like a settling bone. The priest realized that the ledger did not only erase knowledge, it erased witnesses. Those who knew never spoke again because they were no longer positioned to do so. Their relevance dissolved, their presence thinned. This was not punishment, it was correction. He tried to stop reading, but the book did not allow indifference. That night, without opening it, he dreamed of columns and symbols, of tallies that never reached zero, of people standing in lines that moved but never arrived. He woke with ink on his fingers. The ledger was open on the table. A new entry had appeared, dated that morning, with his name. He did not touch the entry with his name. He stood over for a long time, hands folded, as if presiding over his own absence. The handwriting was the careful hand again, not the older, impatient one. This was the script used for custody, not annotation. His name appeared alone without surname, followed by a date range that had not yet ended. No official record explains how a ledger could anticipate duration. The priest closed the book. When he opened it again, the date range had extended by a single day. He began to understand the rules, not because they were explained, but because they behaved consistently. The ledger did not predict. It adjusted. It did not accuse. It accounted. It did not require belief, only participation. What they never wrote down was that once a name entered the ledger, the book no longer needed permission. The priest tested this cautiously. He left the ledger untouched for 3 days. Each morning, the date range beside his name lengthened. Each evening, the margins narrowed. The book was keeping him. He tried to leave the parish. The road out of town was intact, the weather ordinary. He walked for hours, longer than the distance should have required. Landmarks repeated: a bent tree, a stone marker with no inscription, a dry stream bed. When dusk came, the church bell rang behind him. He was standing in the churchyard. No official record explains roads that return you without turning. That night, he searched the ledger for precedents. Other entries with similar structures, single names, open-ended dates. They were rare. Almost all had vanished, but a few remained long enough to suggest a pattern. Each belonged to someone who had attempted to reconcile accounts: a notary, a foreman, a junior clerk from the Port Authority. Their names appeared briefly, then disappeared entirely, not crossed out, not concluded, simply absent, as if they had never required accounting in the first place. The priest noticed something else. None of those names appeared in burial records. They were not dead. They were unresolved. The ledger did not track life. It tracked obligation. The anomaly was not the book. It was the system it represented. The parish had not been a church in the way the records suggested. It had been a hinge, a point where one ledger ended and another began. What passed through was not counted as present, only as transferred. The priest finally read the older marginal notes. He did not translate them. He let them remain shapes, rhythms, pressures. He learned where they appeared and where they did not. They clustered around certain years, certain weeks, always near harvest seasons, never during festivals. The older hand belonged to someone who wrote quickly and left before corrections could be made. Someone who knew the ledger would not forgive explanation. One note appeared beside a large absence, where dozens of entries should have been. The note was short, settled without witness. The priest felt then what the ledger had been designed to prevent: context. He imagined movement without names, transfer without acknowledgement, custody that never resolved into ownership because ownership required recognition. What they never wrote down was that the most efficient system was one that never had to admit what it held. The ledger was not secret because it was hidden. It was secret because it made secrecy unnecessary. The priest tried to burn it. He built the fire carefully, using old hymnals and broken pew fragments. He placed a ledger on top and lit the kindling. The leather blackened but did not curl. The pages did not ignite. The ink did not run. When the fire died, the ledger was untouched, except for one thing. Another page was gone, and so was the hymn that had been used to start the fire. Its title no longer appeared in any book. Parishioners could not recall singing it. The melody dissolved mid-phrase when hummed. The ledger did not resist destruction. It exchanged it. That night, the priest found a cavity behind the sacristy wall open again. Something was inside it now, not an object, a pressure, as if the space expected to be filled. The priest understood then the central rupture, the thing that inverted everything he thought he knew. The ledger was not erasing history. It was absorbing it. Every attempt to document, destroy, or escape added weight elsewhere. The absences were not losses. They were transfers. The parish was not the site of a crime. It was a mechanism that allowed the crime to remain incomplete. And now, the ledger had recorded him, not as a reader, as balance. He approached the cavity and felt the pull strengthen, subtle but insistent, like a current beneath still water. Behind him, the ledger lay open. The date range beside his name extended again. He did not step into the cavity. That mattered. For now, instead, he placed a chair in front of it and sat for hours, watching the darkness as if it might blink first. The pressure inside did not grow stronger. It did not weaken either. It waited, patient, administrative, the way a ledger waits for ink. By morning, the cavity had changed shape, not visibly, not measurably, but the priest felt it when he reached inside again. The depth was shorter, the darkness denser, as if something had been compressed, folded inward, making room. The ledger lay open where he had left it. Another entry had appeared, not his name. The accountant's, dated retroactively. No official record explains how a person can be accounted for after their disappearance. But the ledger did not care about sequence. It cared about closure. The priest began to understand that time inside the book did not flow forward. It settled, like sediment. Events layered until pressure forced transformation. He noticed that the ledger no longer reacted immediately to his understanding. Instead, it delayed. Entries remained intact for hours after being read, sometimes days. This was worse. It meant the ledger was no longer correcting him. It was allowing accumulation. He found an entry that should not have been there. A shipment listed without destination. No symbols indicating transfer. No marks of custody resolution. Just a quantity and a pause. The handwriting was a careful hand, but the ink pressure was uneven, as if the writer had hesitated. Beside it, the older hand had written a single word, held. The priest searched for other instances. There were few. Every one of them preceded a significant absence elsewhere, not in the ledger, in the town. A season with no births recorded. A month where church attendance dropped sharply without explanation. A year when offerings doubled despite no population growth. What they never wrote down was that holding required space. The parish had provided it. Not in cells, not in rooms, in accounting. As long as something was held in record, it did not have to be held physically. The ledger substituted presence. It created a placeholder that allowed bodies to be elsewhere, unseen, uncounted, until the placeholder filled. The cavity behind the wall was not a storage space. It was a remainder. The priest finally understood why the book corrected itself, why pages vanished, why knowledge thinned. The ledger could only contain so much unresolved custody. When it reached capacity, it required balance, and balance meant substitution. He returned to the entry with his name. The date range now extended backward. Years he had already lived were being folded into the accounting. His ordination, his first parish, even his childhood baptism, recorded in a different town, now appeared faintly in the margin, as if being referenced, not rewritten. The ledger was reconciling him, not punishing, replacing. Those who knew never spoke again, because the ledger did not remove them from the world. It reassigned them. The priest tried to warn someone. He chose a woman who cleaned the church at night, someone peripheral, someone unlikely to be believed. He told her only that the records were wrong, that names were missing, that some books should not be read. She listened politely, nodded, returned the next evening as usual. The following morning, her name was gone from the donation ledger, but it appeared in the hidden one. Briefly, then not at all. The priest stopped speaking. Silence slowed the process. Not stopped it, slowed it. The ledger thrived on interaction, on attempts to reconcile meaning with form. Silence created friction, but the cavity continued to compress. On the seventh night, the church bell rang without being pulled. Once, the ledger closed itself. The priest knew then that a threshold had been reached, not a dramatic one. No fire, no collapse, just administrative finality. Something had been balanced. He approached the cavity again. This time, the pressure felt familiar, like a room he had entered many times without noticing. Behind him, the ledger lay quiet. For the first time since he had found it, nothing was missing, and that was the most disturbing change of all. The silence did not mean safety. It meant completion. The priest sensed it in small things first. The way dust settled faster. The way footsteps echoed differently in the nave. The way parishioners spoke without pausing, as if pauses were no longer permitted. He did not open the ledger that day. It remained closed, heavy, inert, a finished object. No official record explains what happens when an account is balanced too well. The cavity behind the wall no longer pulled. It did not wait. It simply existed, shallow now, almost solid. When the priest reached inside, his fingers brushed stone, new stone, warm as if recently laid. Something had been sealed. That night, he dreamed of columns finally reaching zero. He dreamed of tallies erased not by subtraction, but by replacement. Each missing number substituted with a body that could be counted elsewhere. He woke before dawn to the sound of writing. The ledger was open. Ink moved on its own, not flowing, pressing, letters forming slowly, deliberately, as if the book was remembering how to write after a long pause. The priest watched. He did not intervene. A new section was being added. Not custody, testimony. This was different. The handwriting was neither careful nor impatient. It was precise, legal, cold. The language was stripped of symbol and reduced to plain enumeration. Places, dates, transfers that had never been recorded because they had never been completed. The ledger was disgorging what it could no longer hold, but it did not restore names, only routes. What they never wrote down was that the system could fail silently. The priest recognized locations far from the parish, warehouses that had burned without investigation, estates that had changed hands abruptly, ports where manifests were lost in floods that no one remembered. Each route ended the same way, with no arrival. The priest realized this was the inversion. The ledger had absorbed centuries of unresolved custody by substituting presence. Now that balance had been reached, it no longer needed to hide. It needed to offload. The names were gone forever, but the paths remained. The priest understood what the older marginal hand had been doing all along, not annotating, preparing exit points. The ledger had not been created to record slavery. It had been created to make disappearance administratively clean. The church had not been complicit through belief. It had been useful through structure. The priest searched for his name. It was no longer there. That terrified him more than its presence ever had. He ran to the baptismal register. His name remained. He checked burial records. Still nothing. He existed everywhere except where accounting mattered. He was surplus. That night, the bell rang again. This time, twice. The parish doors opened on their own. No one entered. Instead, the air changed. Heavy, pressed flat, like paper stacked too tightly. The priest understood the retention signal without words. This was a moment when people usually left. Not physically. Attention. He stayed. He watched as the ledger completed its final pages. Each route was followed by a notation. Closed by transfer. Not resolved. Transferred. The ledger was not confessing. It was exporting liability. At dawn, the priest carried the book to the altar. He placed it where scripture usually rested. No one noticed. When Mass began, the words came out wrong. Not incorrect. Just empty. familiar phrases that slid past meaning without friction. The congregation responded automatically. The priest watched their mouths move. He realized then that the ledger had succeeded because it never required cruelty, only routine, only silence, only proper keeping of books. After Mass, the ledger was gone, not missing, completed. The altar felt lighter. Behind the sacristy wall, there was no cavity anymore, only stone, smooth, permanent. No official record explains why the parish continued to function normally after that. But visitors sometimes noticed something odd. Names in town repeated too often. Faces felt interchangeable. People arrived without histories and left without memory. And in the archives, there was a gap, a long one, right where the ledger should have been mentioned. Those who knew never spoke again, because there was nothing left to say. And somewhere, far from the parish, routes continued to close, quietly, one by one, until only balance remained. The routes did not close everywhere at once. That was a mistake people later made when trying to explain what followed. They looked for collapse, for reaction, for something loud enough to mark an ending. There was none. What happened after the ledger disappeared was quieter than anything that had come before. The priest began to notice it through correspondence. Letters arrived addressed correctly but written in an unfamiliar hand. Replies he did not remember. Sending were answered with gratitude. Parish donations were acknowledged twice. Then not at all. A shipment of candles arrived without an invoice. Then another arrived canceling it. No official record explains how contradictions can coexist without conflict. The ledger's logic had escaped the book, not as an object, as a method. The priest searched the diocesan archives for mention of similar parishes. He did not search by name. Names were unreliable now. He searched by absence, by years where reports skipped, by towns whose records were inexplicably clean. There were more than he expected, always the same signs. A period of perfect accounting. No disputes, no missing funds, no recorded unrest. Then, gradually, a thinning, fewer unique names, more repetition. Clergy who served unusually long tenures and left no personal correspondence behind. The system favored continuity. People were interchangeable. Positions were not. The priest realized something else then, something that shifted the weight of everything that came before. The ledger had never been local. It had been distributed. Each parish held a fragment of the process. No single place bore responsibility. Custody passed through hands that did not see the whole. What they never wrote down was that this made the system resilient. Destroy one book, and the method remained. The priest tried to speak to his superiors. He chose his words carefully. He did not mention slavery. He did not accuse. He spoke only of discrepancies, of structural oddities, of records that resolved too cleanly. The reply came weeks later. It thanked him for his diligence and reassigned him, not far, a neighboring parish with older walls. When he arrived, the sacristy sounded hollow in the same place. He did not look behind the wall. Not yet. That parish's records were different, more orderly, less obviously manipulated. But the priest noticed something immediately. There was no central ledger. Instead, there were many small ones. Attendance books, donation tallies, work logs, all kept separately. None complete, none contradictory. Together, they formed the same shape. The anomaly had evolved. It no longer required a single object. The priest realized then that the original ledger had been a prototype, a concentration of function. What replaced it was diffuse, invisible, safer. Those who knew never spoke again because knowing no longer involved a book you could point to. It involved habits. He watched parishioners interact. They avoided asking certain questions without knowing why. They accepted unfamiliar faces without curiosity. They repeated phrases during Mass that felt slightly misaligned, but no one corrected them. The ledger's greatest achievement was not erasure. It was normalization. One night, the priest found a page tucked into a hymnal, loose, unbound. The handwriting was the older one, just a single line. Balance does not require memory. The page faded while he read it. The priest understood the retention signal again. This was where explanations would usually be offered. He did not offer any. Instead, he began to count. Not people, intervals. How long a name stayed unique before repeating? How many days before a question stopped being asked? How often a discrepancy resolved itself without action? The answers were consistent. Too consistent. The system was not collapsing. It was stabilizing. And stability, he realized, was the most dangerous outcome of all, because once balance was achieved everywhere, there would be nothing left to disturb it. No ledger to burn. No cavity to seal. Only a world where disappearance required no force. Only paperwork and silence. The priest stopped keeping personal notes. He stopped marking days. He stopped looking for his own name, because he understood now what happened to those who did. They were not erased. They were optimized out. The parish functioned perfectly. And somewhere, far beyond the walls, routes continued to exist without endpoints. Held, not resolved. Waiting. Quietly. The priest began to lose track of when he had arrived at the new parish. Not because time moved strangely, because nothing marked it anymore. No anniversaries. No changes in routine. The calendar advanced, but the days did not differentiate themselves. Each morning arrived already reconciled. That was new. Before, the ledger reacted to tension. Now, the system functioned without it. The priest noticed that sermons no longer lingered in memory. Parishioners nodded at the right moments, responded on cue, and forgot the words immediately afterward. This was not apathy. It was efficiency. Meaning had become unnecessary for participation. No official record explains how belief can persist without content. He searched the parish registers for anomalies. There were fewer this time. That was the point. Records were immaculate. Names appeared exactly as often as required. No one stayed too long. No one vanished abruptly. Movement was constant and smooth, but something was wrong. The priest realized it while comparing handwriting. It was all the same. Not identical in shape, but in pressure, in rhythm, in restraint. The books had been written by many hands, but all with the same hesitation, the same careful avoidance of emphasis, as if each writer knew not to leave a trace of themselves. The priest remembered the older marginal hand from the original ledger. Impatient, slanted, human, that hand was gone. The system no longer tolerated it. Those who knew never spoke again, because there was no longer a role for knowing, only for recording. The priest began to test the edges again, carefully. He asked questions that should have produced uncertainty. They didn't. He asked where a particular family had gone. He was told they had always lived elsewhere. He asked when a building had been constructed. He was told it had always been there. He asked why a donation amount repeated exactly every month. He was thanked for his concern. Nothing changed. The ledger had taught the system its final lesson. If records are consistent enough, reality will adapt to them. What they never wrote down was that truth does not disappear when erased. It migrates. The priest noticed in dreams shared by parishioners. Similar images, corridors, waiting rooms without doors, lines that moved but never advanced. No one described suffering. Only delay, delay without end. One night, a young boy asked the priest a question he should not have known how to ask. "Father," he said, "where do people go when they're finished being counted?" The priest said nothing. The next day, the boy's name appeared twice in the attendance book. The priest closed the book. He began to understand that the system was not interested in cruelty or concealment anymore. It was interested in maintenance, in keeping unresolved custody circulating without friction. This was the central horror. Not chains, not punishment, continuity. The priest found a room beneath the parish he had not noticed before. Not hidden, just unremarkable. No lock, no markings. Inside, shelves lined the walls. Empty shelves, except for labels, dates, routes, quantities. No names. The room was not used. It was reserved. The priest realized this was where the ledger had been headed all along. Not into fire, not into stone, into architecture. The system no longer needed a book because it had become space. Physical, distributed, ordinary. Those who knew never spoke again because speaking implied interruption. An interruption was now the only thing that did not fit. The priest tried one final act of resistance. He altered a record, just slightly, a number off by one, a name misspelled, nothing dramatic. The system reacted immediately, not by correcting the entry, by correcting the environment. The parish received one additional parishioner that week, a man whose name matched the altered spelling perfectly. He arrived with no documents, no past. He fit the record exactly. The priest understood then the final inversion. Records were no longer describing reality. Reality was being supplied to satisfy records. The priest tore the altered page out. The next morning, the man was gone, and so was the page. Balance restored. The priest did not try again, because he finally understood what the ledger had always done. It did not erase people. It prevented remainders. Anything that did not fit was either absorbed or supplied until the equation closed. And equations, once closed, do not care what they contain. The priest stopped writing altogether. He performed his duties precisely. He spoke little. He waited, because waiting was the only unresolved action left. And somewhere, in rooms without shells and corridors without doors, custody continued. Perfectly, silently, without witnesses. By the time the priest realized he was being waited on, it was already too late to name it. The waiting did not come from people. It came from the structure itself, from the way rooms held their shape even when unused, from the way doors remained unlocked without invitation, from the way silence lingered longer than it should have. He noticed it most clearly during confession. Parishioners entered, spoke in familiar rhythms, and left without relief, not burdened, not absolved, neutral, as if the act of speaking had been recorded, processed, and closed without interpretation. No official record explains what happens when confession stops producing forgiveness. The priest stopped assigning penance, not out of mercy, out of irrelevance. Nothing changed. The system had learned that intention was unnecessary. Only completion mattered. He began to sense moments where the parish paused, not physically, but administratively. Small gaps, fractions of seconds where nothing advanced, where breath seemed to wait for approval. During one of these pauses, he heard it, not a voice, a count, measured, even, relentless. It did not come from the walls or the floor. It came from behind the order of things, like a metronome embedded in space. He realized then that the system was no longer reacting. It was anticipating. The priest returned to the archives one final time. He did not search for the ledger. He searched for anomalies that could not be reconciled. There were none. Every discrepancy had been absorbed. Every contradiction resolved by substitution. Every silence accounted for. The ledger's logic had achieved its final form, self-sustaining. What they never wrote down was that once this happened, witnesses were no longer needed. The priest felt it happen to him gradually. His reflection became less distinct, not blurred, standardized. He noticed it in mirrors, in windows, in polished metal. His face no longer carried hesitation. It matched the role precisely. His name was spoken less often, not avoided, unnecessary. One evening, he found a register open on the altar, not the parish register, a new one, unbound, blank except for a heading written in the careful hand, surplus. The priest closed it. The next morning, it was open again, with one entry. No name, just a date. That day, he understood then what the system had been waiting for. Not confession, not resistance, resolution. The priest walked through the parish slowly, noticing details he had ignored before. The way floor tiles aligned too perfectly. The way pews had been repaired, without anyone remembering when. The way people navigated space without collision, as if guided. The system had replaced friction with flow, and he was the last irregularity. He entered the room beneath the parish. The shelves were no longer empty. They were filled, not with objects, with weight. Each label now corresponded to a density in the air, a pressure that pressed against the chest without pain. Routes, closed, transferred. He realized then that what had been held for centuries was not bodies. It was imbalance. And now, balance had been achieved. The priest felt no fear. Fear required uncertainty. This was accounting. He understood why the ledger had removed names. Names created resistance. Quantities did not. He stepped into the center of the room. The pressure increased slightly. Enough. Behind him, footsteps echoed, not approaching, aligning. He did not turn. He no longer needed to. The count continued. Even. Precise. The system did not need him to disappear. It needed him to resolve. And somewhere, far from the parish, a route closed for the final time. Quietly, permanently, as if it had always been meant to end here. The priest did not vanish. That was a final misunderstanding. When people later tried to reconstruct what happened, those few who sensed that something had shifted but could not say how, they searched for an absence, a missing body, an unexplained death, a record that stopped. They found none. The priest continued to be seen. He officiated Mass. He walked the nave. He spoke when spoken to. He ate. He slept. He aged. But he no longer accumulated. That was the difference. No memories adhered to him. Conversations slid off. Parishioners recalled his presence, but not his words. Visitors could describe his posture, but not his face. Photographs developed with a figure where he stood, but no defining detail ever resolved. No official record explains how a person can remain without contributing. The priest had become a stabilizer. The system had not consumed him. It had assigned him. This was the inversion no one had anticipated. For centuries, the ledger had absorbed imbalance by erasing names, compressing records, substituting placeholders. But now that the method was distributed, now that space itself carried a function, it required a fixed reference, something that would not move, something that would not ask, something that would not be remembered. The priest fulfilled this perfectly. He noticed a change in his own thoughts. They no longer drifted. They returned, always to the same neutral center. He could reflect on the past without emotion, consider the future without anticipation. Desire did not trouble him. Regret did not attach. This was not peace. It was equilibrium. He realized then who had truly been held all along, not the enslaved whose names vanished from records, not the accountants, clerks, or foremen optimized out of existence. It was the witnesses, those capable of noticing imbalance, those whose awareness created friction. They had always been surplus. The ledger had never been about controlling bodies. It was about neutralizing perception. What they never wrote down was that silence was not enforced. It was engineered. The priest began to see others like himself. Not many. Enough. They occupied roles that required presence without influence. Watchmen, caretakers, archivists, positions where continuity mattered more than contribution. They recognized each other without acknowledgement. A glance held too long. A pause that never completed. They were anchors. The system no longer needed to erase them. It needed them to stay. This explained the oldest anomaly of all. Why the ledger's earliest entries never mentioned violence. Why no punishments were recorded. Why suffering appeared only as absence. Because suffering created testimony, and testimony created instability. The true function had always been to ensure that nothing ever accumulated enough meaning to demand resolution. The priest remembered the phrase from the older marginal hand, settled without witness. He finally understood it. Nothing in the system required denial, only completion. The parish continued. Generations passed. No collapse came. No reckoning followed. Records improved. Efficiency increased. The system grew quieter. And the priest remained. One evening, long after anyone who had known him personally was gone, a child stood at the back of the church and stared at him for an unusually long time. "Why are you still here?" the child asked. The priest opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The next day, the question was never asked again. And somewhere, in an archive no one consulted anymore, a balance sheet reached zero for the last time, not with an ending, with a stabilization. The world did not notice, because it no longer needed to. The priest's presence stopped registering as duration. Days passing the way air passes stone. He did not mark time, and time no longer marked him. Seasons changed around the parish, but inside the walls, everything remained evenly lit, evenly paced, evenly resolved. This was not immortality. It was irrelevance perfected. No official record explains what happens after balance is achieved everywhere. The answer is nothing. Nothing changes. The priest noticed that visitors stopped asking questions entirely. They asked for directions, for schedules, for confirmations already approved. No one asked why. No one asked when. No one asked who had been there before. History had become procedural. He began to hear fewer names spoken aloud. People were referred to by function more often than identity. The sacristan, the cleaner, the one who handles records. Names still existed, but they carried no weight. They could be exchanged without friction. The system was no longer correcting errors. It was preventing them. The priest understood now why the ledger had removed its own pages. Explanation was inefficient. Meaning was excess. One night, long after confession hours had ended, the priest sat alone in the nave and felt the count slow. Not stop, hesitate. A single interval stretched longer than the rest. The priest recognized it instinctively, an irregularity. Somewhere beyond the parish, beyond the routes and shelves and quiet rooms, something had failed to align. Not enough to disrupt the system, just enough to require review. The priest stood. He walked without urgency, guided not by choice but by necessity, down corridors he had never noticed before, through doors that had always been unlocked but never used. He entered a room smaller than the one beneath the parish. This one had no shelves, only a table. On it lay a single sheet of paper, unmarked, blank. The priest understood immediately. This was not a ledger. It was a placeholder. Something had not been resolved. The system did not know what to do with it yet. For the first time in years, the priest felt something approach sensation, not fear, tension. The paper waited. The priest did not touch it. He did not need to. Slowly, without sound, ink appeared, not forming words, forming space. Margins first, then columns, then lines where entries would eventually go. The system was preparing to account for something new. The priest realized in the most unsettling truth of all, the ledger had not been about the past. It had been rehearsal. What they never wrote down was that once a method works perfectly, it is never abandoned. It is reused, refined, scaled. The priest watched as the sheet finished preparing itself. The count resumed, regular, even. The hesitation closed. Somewhere, a new imbalance had been accepted, not challenged, absorbed. The priest left the room. Behind him, the blank sheet waited patiently. It would be filled when the time came, and it always came, because systems that erase witnesses never run out of material. They only run out of resistance. The parish bell rang once, not a signal, a confirmation, and the priest returned to his place, still present, still unremembered, still necessary. The priest began to sense the thinning, not of people, of variance. Every action now fell within an expected range. Voices rose and fell predictably. Footsteps echoed with uniform delay. Even accidents had become procedural. Small, contained, resolved without residue. No official record explains how a world functions when unpredictability is eliminated. It functions smoothly, too smoothly. The priest noticed that children stopped playing games with unclear rules. Their games ended quickly. Winners were obvious. Losers accepted outcomes without protest. No one argued about fairness. Fairness required comparison. Comparison required memory. Memory had become inefficient. The priest walked through the parish as if through a finished document. Everything had been accounted for. Everything fit. There were no margins left. He realized then why the system required anchors like him. Not to act, to remain. Anchors prevented drift. They ensured that even as everything changed, nothing deviated. The priest had not been chosen for virtue or guilt. He had been chosen for suitability. A man accustomed to silence. A man who noticed but did not interrupt. A man whose disappearance would not be missed, but whose presence ensured continuity. Those who knew never spoke again because speaking was now a malfunction. One afternoon, the priest entered the small room again. The blank sheet on the table was no longer blank. It contained entries. Not many. Enough. Each line described a movement that had not yet occurred. Dates in the future. Routes unnamed. Quantities marked as provisional. The priest understood. The system was no longer reacting to imbalance. It was forecasting it. The ledger had become predictive. What they never wrote down was that once prediction becomes accurate enough, prevention becomes unnecessary. Events would occur because they had already been accounted for. Reality would comply. The priest felt the last remnant of uncertainty leave him. This was not surrender. It was closure. He realized then that there would be no final disappearance, no dramatic ending, no revelation that could be exposed. The system had matured beyond the need for secrecy. It was invisible because it was complete. The priest returned to the nave and stood behind the altar. A visitor entered, an old man, unfamiliar, hesitant. "Father," he said, "I feel like something important is missing." The priest looked at him. For a fraction of a second, the count faltered, just slightly. Enough. The priest opened his mouth and said nothing. The old man nodded. Relief crossed his face. He left. The priest understood then the final function he served. Not witness, not guardian, filter. Anything that threatened to accumulate meaning passed through him and emerged neutralized, converted into silence. The priest remained at his post. The system continued, and somewhere beyond memory and record, the last imbalance approached its entry point, already prepared, already formatted, waiting to be counted. The priest did not feel the moment when the system stopped needing him. There was no signal for that, no bell, no pause, no hesitation in the count. One day, he simply realized that he could leave. The realization itself felt like an error, not forbidden, just unnecessary. He tested it by stepping away from the altar during hours when someone should have noticed. No one did. The parish continued to function with the same precision, the same smooth circulation of presence without memory. The anchor was no longer required. That was the final optimization. No official record explains what happens when even witnesses become redundant. They are not removed. They are released. The priest walked out of the church and down the road he had once tried to leave. This time it did not loop back. The landmarks did not repeat. The road behaved like a road. That disturbed him more than confinement ever had, because it meant the system had closed behind him perfectly. As he walked, he tried to remember details of the ledger, specific entries, names, symbols, routes. They did not come, not blocked, not erased, just irrelevant, like recalling the serial number of a tool long after it has been discarded. He passed through towns that felt familiar without being known, churches whose stones sounded solid, archives that smelled clean, records that balanced too well to invite curiosity. Everywhere, the same quiet efficiency. No gaps, no excess, no questions. The priest realized then what the ledger had ultimately achieved. Not silence, compliance without awareness. A world where nothing needed to be hidden, because nothing was allowed to accumulate enough meaning to threaten the structure. He understood why the ledger had removed its own pages, why it had dissolved into habits, rooms, routines, architecture, why it had replaced witnesses with flow. Because history does not need to be erased if it is never allowed to stabilize. What they never wrote down was that the most effective form of control is not force, it is closure. The priest reached the edge of a port city as evening settled. Ships moved in and out with practiced rhythm. Cargo was transferred efficiently. Manifests matched. No delays. He watched workers pass him, faces calm, interchangeable, unremarkable. For the first time in decades, he felt something that resembled guilt, not for what he had done, for what he had allowed to resolve. He understood now that the ledger had never been about slavery alone. That had only been the training ground. The ledger had taught the world how to move people, responsibility, and meaning without residue. How to ensure that nothing ever demanded to be answered. The priest stood among strangers who would not remember him, in a city that did not need him, in a world that no longer required witnesses. And he realized a final, unbearable inversion. Nothing had been hidden from history. History had been balanced, settled, closed, without witness. The priest turned away from the port. Behind him, ships departed on routes that did not end. Ahead of him, the road continued normally. And somewhere, everywhere, the count went on. Even, precise, uninterrupted, as if nothing had ever been missing at all.